Hello, everybody. My name is Alex, and today I'll be talking about how we can rebalance our national debt without leaving others behind. I want to start off by saying that it took over 100 years, several budgets, wars, recessions, and more for our government debt to climb up to an eye-watering $14 trillion by 2012. Today, that debt has doubled to $29 trillion, meaning that what took a century to build up was achieved in only a decade and a half. And I want to put that 29 trillion into perspective, right? According to this visual by visual capitalist, that is more than the value of the six largest Western economies behind the United States combined. The debt issue is not only about size, but it's about its consequences that can potentially kill the American dream. It can lead to a world where the opportunities afforded to our generation are simply gone by the next. So, today in my speech, I want to explain the debt crisis, why it's relevant, why it's important, and how we can solve it without leaving millions behind. By the end of today, I want you to call your representative, and I'll show you how we can mold public policy to make our tax dollars more efficient while cutting down the debt. So, let's begin with the diagnosis of the problem, right? What exactly is the national debt and why does it matter? So, to simply define the national debt, uh, it is the total amount of money that the federal government owes from accumulated deficits. You see, whenever the government spends more than it earns in taxes, it has to borrow to cover the difference. A great analogy to understand it is by saying that the national debt is like someone using a credit card for purchases and not paying the balance each month, letting the debt accumulate over time. And I believe that kind of silly analogy perfectly segues into my next point, which is why the national debt is so expensive. I mean, so dangerous, which can be split into two parts. So, just like any other debt, the United States has to pay interest on the loans it holds. So, as the debt grows larger and larger, these obligations also grow larger and larger. Interest isn't necessarily the issue here. It's just the sheer amount of it that is scary. Um, we pay more in interest payments than the most expensive government programs, with it being $881 billion in year 2024, according to the Congressional Budget Office. This will lead to key government programs simply being crowded out by these payments. And as I said earlier, this is only one part of the problem, with the other half being much scarier. You see, the government borrows money by selling bonds, which can be split into two parts: the bond price and the interest rate. Why does this matter? Well, the interest rate serves as the basis for the financial market. Let's put it this way: when these rates are low, this means your mortgage rate is low, your student loan rates are low, your car loan rates are low, etc. For example, in COVID, these rates were near zero, making it easier for the average person to borrow. But in 2022, these rates were raised, making it much more expensive for not only you, but the government to borrow money as well. So let's just say that investors get queasy about America's ability to pay off its debt. What happens next? Well, this is the scary part. If they massively sell off government debt or demand more interest, they'll cause borrowing for the government to get more expensive. This means that the government borrows less principal money but has to pay more in interest. A real cycle can happen where, in order to pay off these new interest payments, we have to borrow more, which investors get freaked out because um, that means the debt is more riskier. So they demand more interest, which leads to borrowing costs getting higher, which means that we have to borrow to pay it off because there's no other way. And you see where this is going, right? So, all the while this is happening, average Americans can buy less of the things they previously could, like housing, cars, or experience less like college. What you gotten yourself into is a real debt cycle, which can continue up into the nation's default, which is which means which is financial ruin for it and its citizens. The social economic damage this cause this event can cause is unlike anything we've seen. The wealth inequality gap will widen extremely. Opportunities will dry up, and the American dream will cease to be a possibility. This is why the national debt is so important and why we must solve it. Because if we don't, it'll affect all of us. So, how do we solve this problem? Well, the answer is not what you think, and the answer is not what's happening right now. While your first thought might be to cut government spending on non essential programs, it's important to understand that in the wrong hands, this approach called austerity can actually make things worse. In practice, countries that adopt austerity often end up with weaker public services and greater inequality. Let's take the UK, for example, where they use austerity to address their national debt. They left public services much worse off, with The Guardian and the Institute for Government citing austerity for the National Health Service, tripling wait times, high staff turnover, and 50-hour work weeks becoming the norm. The New York Times also reports that in the same period, child poverty actually increased by 600,000 kids. Despite this hardship, the UK government never saw a single surplus in their 14 years of austerity. I say this because America is going down the same route that the UK went through, with Doge and the Big Beautiful Bill, which will do both spending cuts and tax cuts. According to the CBO, this will bring trillions to the debt at the cost of programs that benefit the lower class, such as Medicaid, SNAP, and the VA. We should take Britain as a clear example of where this route leads us into absolute disaster. So, what do we do instead? We cut the deficit not through harm, but efficiency. We do this by giving the government the simple power to negotiate. Our three biggest contributors to spending, other than interest payments, are Medicaid, Medicare, and the military. In order to buy the goods that they need for these programs, the federal government has to go through middlemen such as drug companies and contractors. These middlemen are incentivized because they're for profit, are incentivized to milk as much money from the government as humanly possible. Don't believe me? Well, how about the fact that according to Rand Health Quarterly, we pay 278% more on average than 33 developed countries for prescription drugs. Or the fact that according to the Project on Government Oversight, the Pentagon overpaid 163% on electrical wiring. Or the fact that, I swear to God, I'm not making this up, that Boeing inflated a tiny metal pin's price by 177,000%. The solution is simple. Give the government the power to negotiate. And luckily, I already have proof that this method works. In 2022, Joe Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, which gave Medicare, the insurance company, the insurance program that covers almost 70 million Americans, the power to negotiate for the first time. With this power, the CBO estimates that it'll save $237 billion over the period 2022 to 2031, making drugs more affordable for millions of retired and senior citizens while reducing the debt seems like a pretty great deal to me. And it's clear that every time the government has the power to oversee and negotiate contracts, it leads to savings. For example, a CBS investigation revealed that the Pentagon saved $500 million by simply doing a cost review of Boeing and Lockheed Martin's previous work. It should bring you incredible hope that we can bring down the deficit without leaving millions behind or creating unnecessary chaos in the national government. So, right now, I want you to visualize these two choices I laid in front of you. One of them will end government spending and taxes. One of them will cut government spending and taxes, contributing to the debt crisis. Well, that will certainly make our lives a financial hell. This reality is unfortunately already happening, with millions of Americans at risk of losing health care due to spending cuts and Trump's big beautiful bill. We can reverse this and give the government the power to negotiate and help the millions it represents. We can cut down the debt not through harm, but through efficiency, oversight, and efficiency. So here's what I want you to do, right? Call your local representative up, Democrat or Republican, and say that you are against blindly gutting federal agencies that help the middle and lower classes. Secondly, I want you to pressure them to go against the drug and military lobbyists that and expand the federal government's ability to negotiate contracts. For Medicare, let your congressperson know about the Smart Prices Act. For the military, reforms such as um, lowering mandatory spending thresholds, mandatory refunds, and more are great steps to increase negotiation power. So I'll leave you with this. We were raised to believe that each generation would do better than the last, but if we don't solve this crisis, it might, for the first time that the promise may be broken. Not by war, but by neglect. Please don't let my generation down. Don't let the next generation down. Spread the word, vote, call, and email your representatives. I want to keep the American dream alive, and so do you. Thank you.